Should male drivers be made to take tougher driving tests? That question alone will annoy a lot of people. So please do call if it's annoyed you. 0207 862 2222 is the number to give us a ring. A campaign in France is encouraging drivers to drive like a woman. Now, the aim is to cut traffic deaths while debunking the sexist stereotype that men are better behind the wheel. The statistics also are out on this, as research from the RAC claim that male drivers are nearly 3 times more likely to have a serious collision compared to female drivers. So when you think about that, let me know how you feel about a tougher test for male drivers. Perhaps you know a male driver that could do with a tougher test, or perhaps you are one. Bobby, I'm going to start with you as the man on the panel. How would you feel if we said you're probably going to be a worse driver than Lynn and I on the basis of you being male?
Which is true, yeah.
Well, I don't know, you haven't seen us drive.
I mean,
but
statistically
speaking, it is absolutely accurate. We're going to give you a harder test. We're going to make it harder for you to get a licence.
I wouldn't want a harder test. I wouldn't mind a focused test on male testosterone, young men, and how they approach driving. I'm not young anymore. I know what I was like when I first
Don't do that. You're still young.
I know the chances I took, the danger I got myself in, the situations me and my friends got ourselves in when we all passed. We all passed around 17, 18. We all got cars back in the day. This was the late 80s. And I know, as a middle-aged man now, that I wasn't compos mentis really fully in terms of what speed meant, stopping speeds. I think most middle-aged men will also defend that. Even if they think men are better drivers later on, they know what they were like when they were young. So I'm not saying make it harder. I'm saying let's look at testosterone, young men, the way their brains are constructed, and basically change the test so we focus on that. And secondly, I don't mind being called a girly driver. My friends used to call me the granny driver when I first passed.
Good.
Just because, I mean, I was still dangerous, but I was a lot slower than they were. And now my friends say, oh, you're like a really nice cab driver when we get in the car with you. You know, like a
I don't
really
know how you would
smooth.
take that.
No, I don't
really
mind.
Nice some cab drivers aren't very good drivers, so I don't know, that could go either way, Bobby. But Lynn, is this fair to say harder tests for men?
I'm not really an advocate for blanket sort of policy where it's gender-based. However, what I think should happen is whoever, male or female, gets maybe 6 points in the first 2 years of them driving, that's when they should be hauled in to have some more focused training or some additional tests. I don't think you should just put a sweeping blanket over all men. Why should they have to undergo that? Which will obviously make it harder, which will also make it the failure easier for them to be able to fail. So my point is, let's see how they perform in the first 2 years and then treat them on the basis of that.
OK. However, when boys particularly have just passed their test, I think the first 6 months might be the most dangerous. And when I'm saying not just collisions, we could see fatalities. We cannot not mention the terrible case in Wales where we had the 4 boys who tragically passed away in terrible circumstances. And a lot of that was to do with the driving. One of the boys' parents, not the one that was driving, has said that, you know, there should be a ban on new drivers having passengers.
Yeah. Okay, let me ask this. If, when it comes to gender, we don't take the same ardent approach or the sensitivities, and I'll put this in the works, Asian men are more known for being boy racers. The statistics are there that...
Are they?
They are.
I'm going to jump in here. I know you think I'm going to viciously argue against you. There's a culture of what we used to call boy racing. There's a real culture amongst sections of the British Asian community where essentially boy racing, speeding in
modified cars,
supercars, which is very different. Boy racers in the 80s would race around in a Fiesta. Now you get supercars.
So should we, how would you feel, or how would everyone feel to say, oh, all the Asian boys in the lesson today who are undergoing...
It already happens with insurance.
You've got a different, in terms of...
Insurance.
We would say that's racist.
Okay, but hold on.
The same with black boys and inner city gang violence. We're not going to accept that they should be more profiled by the police because knife crime amongst young blacks.
But it's already happening with
insurance.
With insurance, where if you live in a
As an Asian.
Asian area, if you have the postcodes, it's all. If you live in an Asian area and you have certain names, you get charged
But that is wrong, because the same thing happened with Nigerian people that were trying to open bank accounts because there was a lot of fraud issues. And even David Cameron came out and said, just because they have a Nigerian name, this is racism. So let's go back to sexism. To me, this is sexism.
All right. I mean, I can't clarify anything that you two are saying, but you two are both in agreement, so I can't...
He's Asian, I'm half Asian.
I also can't deny it. All right. So we'll go to the calls. Charles from Glasgow, what do you think about men having a slightly more difficult test?
I don't think they should, actually. I think we're all equal and we're all good, reasonable drivers. What I find is that the test could be a lot harder.
Okay.
We could do more to put people on motorways and have them driving properly and not erratically. But if the test isn't harder, then we're going to have people getting through their test and they're not good drivers. And
Charles,
all these accidents, etc., that's what's happening. They're not good drivers.
It did surprise me when I passed my test that I hadn't even been in a motorway yet. They don't test you on the motorway. I mean, most of my driving now as an adult is on the motorway, and yet that's something that I kind of had to learn by myself when I'm going the fastest that I've ever been, because that's just the way of things on a motorway. But Charles, when you go back to you think we're all equal, the stats prove time and time again that we are not. Sadly, we are seeing particularly young men, but men in general, I think of the deaths on the road last year, 72% were men. So when we're talking about serious collisions and fatalities, so we're talking about losing lives and saving lives here, it is men that are most at risk. Now, whether that's because men's brains develop later in terms of the risk centre of their brain.
They do. That's actually true.
Which is true, although I think women's develop a little bit later as well than we think. But the other thing that could be happening is there does seem to be this sexist view that men are better drivers. Now, overconfidence on the road, Charles, can also get you in a spot of bother. So that's what France is trying to readdress with this Drive Like a Woman campaign. Do you not think there's some insight into this? There's something in this?
Hesitancy is... I was marked down for hesitancy.
Hesitancy
and that
doesn't get you killed, though.
It still leads to accidents.
An accident going 2 miles per hour is a lot easier to deal with than an accident going 70. Charles, do you not see any value in what the French are trying to do?
Well, I think men actually mature a lot later than women, basically.
So raise their age.
And that all these accidents you're talking about, they can be eradicated completely. And it's all about people's driving habits and what they're doing on the road. I mean, you see time and time again, people are reading papers, putting on makeup, answering calls. We're not diligent enough. And a lot, if you put all these things into the test being harder, I think the road would be a lot safer for everyone.
Or if we make tests harder, even just for men, but for everybody, then we're all going to get a little bit more arrogant, a little bit too confident.
What about split the test up in 3 parts? So you drive for a bit, come back for your test, depending on how well you fit a box. You know these boxes that you have now?
Yeah.
You have maybe all new drivers should have 2 years of a box to see how you drive.
Well, I think a lot of young drivers are fitting these boxes just to get that insurance down. Charles, thank you very much for your call. Susan from Lincolnshire, what do you think about all this?
Well, I think that driving is, it doesn't matter whether it's men or women. My late husband was a driving instructor, and he said that women were easier to teach because they took longer, but because they needed to know why and wherefore. Gentlemen thought they knew it all. I think that's about the only thing I can really say is he said he did like teaching ladies to drive, and he taught a lot of local ladies in the village that we live because he'd got good a reputation of, but for various reasons.
Driving
and they all passed their test.
Yes. Okay, so, and he liked, because it took longer, which meant also a few more lessons for him. That's always handy when you're a driving instructor. But also because women had to know why everything had to happen and everything behind it. But it's that confidence that I think you're getting to the crux of certainly how the French have interpreted it. It's that overconfidence that we see in young men and men of all ages. on the roads that lead to trouble. Now, how do we compensate for that? If we don't give them a tougher test, what can we do to bring their confidence back into line with reality?
Sweetheart, if you live in the country, the girls are as bad as the men, or the ladies are as bad as the men.
Are they?
And
driving fast?
Yes.
Girl racers?
Oh, yes.
I was.
We do. And it's because in towns and cities, they don't get chance. Come out into the countryside, these little lovely country lanes, and they stick their foot down. And girls are just as bad as boys. And I can say that because, A, I'm too old now, but I've done it.
Oh, Susan.
Yes, Susan.
Well, that's terrifying. But thank you very much for your honesty. It's the country roads that really worry me. I mean, I've got a son. We'll meet him later. He's only 2, so I've got a little while to worry about this. But the thought of him getting a driving licence and having to allow him out onto country roads does fill me with dread. Susan, thank you very much for your call. Sam from Belfast, harder tests for men.
Not harder tests. Do what has been done in Northern Ireland from, I think, possibly the late 50s. Once you pass your test, the first year of your driving, you must have your R plates up, the same as your L plates, and you're restricted to 45 miles an hour.
Okay.
And if you don't display your R plates and you do something stupid, you get another year for your R plates.
That starts to sound, that is very interesting. And it starts to come in line with what you're suggesting, is that not to discriminate between men and women, even though the statistics say there are differences between the two, but actually just to put more restrictions on new drivers across the board.
Yep.
What about the idea of banning drivers from having passengers for the first couple of years?
I would say for the first 6 months, yes, because you do need to find your feet on the road. It does take a while to get you. Well, I started driving in the late 70s. There wasn't so many cars on the road then as there is now, and it would be scary now, I think, for any new drivers to go out, and have their mates and yahooing and messing about in the car and whatever else. It takes a while to get your concentration right.
Showing off, isn't it? Young people like to show off.
I was banned from having the radio on, I think, because my parents thought that me singing along to Beyonce was going to be my biggest problem on the road. And to be honest, they were probably right. And it did me no harm, actually, to not have the radio on or any passengers in my car for the first little while.
Yeah.
But whether this needs to be put into law, I don't know. But that was an interesting conversation. Nobody really into having tougher tests for men, though. Okay. We're not into the sort of French way of doing things.